This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. Happy 2023. I hope you're all doing good today. This is the Sunday stream, the stream I do on Sundays, because Sunday is the day to stream on Sundays. Yes, we are at the beginning of a brand new year, the very first Sunday stream of 2023. I got a few things to say about that, but we'll get to that momentarily. Who's joining me? Who's sober? Who's not suffering from a hangover or sleeping in on this Sunday morning? Michael Coffey, good morning. Tyrannus Alexandrius Tremirlich, good morning. Funtime Bats, good morning. Matt Barnes, good morning. Random American, good morning. Rotten Corpse, good morning. Ham and Beans, good morning. A2P, good morning. Ryan R, good morning. Keeverdam, good morning. I, Vercingetorix, good morning. Swirl Blue, good morning. Mike Savage, Blarg morning. Shadowclaw, good morning. Emperor W.R. Costin, good morning. You're ridiculous lunatic, good morning. And Stig Helmer, good morning. And if I missed you, if you're lurking or if you're in the future, good morning to you, good morning to you. We're all in our places with bright shining faces. A couple of things before we start. First off, at the top of the chat box, you will see a link to a GoFundMe to help out Rosebud, a little puppy that was hit by a car and has a fractured hip. And that is the puppy of our friend Twisted Skipster. Only asking for about $800 for medical vet bills. About halfway there, just over halfway there at this point, as of this recording. So if you have a couple of bucks to spare before you think of donating to myself on this stream particularly, please, if you could, throw a couple of bucks their way and help out little puppy Rosebud. Secondly, kind of a sad, sardonic note. Last night was, as advertised, the last live stream and perhaps the last appearance on the internet, don't know, I hope it isn't, but we never know, of Mr. Mediker, a.k.a. the Internet Aristocrat, a.k.a. Jim81 Jim, a.k.a. a YouTube legend, as far as I'm concerned. I ran into him back in 2014, 2 years before I started my own channel, when I came across the Quinspiracy Theory video talking about the Zoe Quinn and the Zoe Post, and everything that basically started the whole Gamergate saga, which by itself is a epic of its own accord, but certainly opened my eyes to the manipulations of media to a story and the interconnectedness and incestuousness of media outlets and their subjects, whether it's gaming news or otherwise, as we know. And also, just as a side effect of that, introduced me to so many other YouTube content creators peripherally that eventually inspired me to try this myself. So I know that Jim, by all reports, is in a bad way, and his prognosis is not good. And I hope for all things else that he and his family are doing well, and that, my best wishes, whatever that means, thoughts and prayers, and Kwanzaa Sandra Lee cakes to Jim81 Jim. I hope, I hope he does not suffer any more than is absolutely necessary. That's the best I can do. A legend, an absolute legend. Anyway, that somber moment aside, a couple of future programming notes for this year. In the relatively near future, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I'll be doing another episode of Living on Borrowed Crime. Dave's Lemonade and I have been in contact for some time, and we keep meaning to do a show together, or I interview him or have him on a panel or something, and circumstances just keep getting in the way. Hopefully, fingers crossed, knock for Micah, that will not be the case soon, and that in the coming weeks, I will be able to have him on either on a direct interview or on a panel, whichever he's more comfortable with and whichever I can arrange more effectively. So looking forward to that in the coming new year. As for anything else, I have ideas. I have plans. Will I follow through? I don't know, but I don't want to sign any checks I can't cash. So I'll hold off on those until I have something more concrete to say. But as per usual, the Sunday stream and the TEDx streams will continue. And speaking of which, well, it's Sunday, and I have a Sunday stream. And I came across this, a couple of weeks ago. It kind of got put on the back burner because of other things. But yeah, this is only a couple of months old. So CRT, critical race theory, hasn't really been in the news much lately, but apparently it's high enough profile in Wisconsin that the PBS outlet there decided to do a little show on it. This is only a couple of months old, so we're not talking like years ago or back when the controversy was at its height. So what does the PBS outlet of Wisconsin have to say about critical race theory and why race really matters, using presumably taxpayer money to broadcast this? I don't know. I guess we'll find out together. A few more hellos and then we'll get into it. Renovatio, good morning. Spoony the Rebel, good morning. Johnny Hellcat, good morning. Who else? Seftus Wolf, good morning. Art210, good morning. Ken Elliott, good morning. And anybody else that I'm seeing here that I've missed? I don't think so. Again, if I missed you, if you're lurking, if you're in the future, good morning. And meh, good morning. All right. So with all that as preamble and as a little bit of killing time before other people showed up, let's get into it. Oh, whoa. I just clicked my own link to my own show and started hearing my own voice, and that was disturbing. Wikipedia snippet, good morning. Now, let's try this again. PBS Wisconsin, I'll start off with a few seconds for a sound test. I did cut out some music stuff at the beginning, just on the off chance it's copyrighted or something. But let me know if you guys can hear it, and then we will proceed.
Critical race theory, or CRT, isn't a new framework or way of thinking.
You're right. It's not. Racism has been around a long time. You guys hear that okay? Let me know in the chat real quick. Audio is good, says Renovatio. We can hear, says Ryan R. Well, I'm glad you can hear, but is the show coming through? There you go. Okay.
But it has received renewed attention due to anti-CRT legislation created across the United States.
Yeah. Why is that? And what exactly is the rationale behind it? I'm curious to find out if you give the opposing viewpoint a fair hearing before you discuss how positive and necessary it is.
So what is CRT exactly? And why is it producing such a strong reaction in some states?
Well, because it makes race a value factor in assessing people and holds people today accountable in some way, shape, or form for the actions of people in the past that they have no connection to other than their skin color. I think I summarized that pretty well, don't you think?
So much that some lawmakers are pushing to ban teaching it in schools. Let's find out why race matters when it comes to history, racism, and education.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious why race matters to racism, because if you think race matters, you might be a racist. But, okay, you tell me.
Critical race theory, or CRT, can be a controversial buzzword today.
I think is.
But that wasn't always the case. In fact, it isn't even a new concept. CRT dates back to the 1970s and 80s as a framework for legal analysis that was created by several legal scholars to suggest that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely individual bias or prejudice, but something embedded in systems, policies, and practices.
Yes, even when it's invisible, even when you can't point to it, but you can always come up with an excuse by pointing or accusing someone of racism because it's ethereal. If it's not written down in black and white somewhere, no pun intended, but I'll take it, you can just assume that it exists because things didn't go your way.
CRT suggests that because racism is so deeply ingrained in the fabric of our nation, even well-intentioned decisions made by individuals can help to fuel racism.
Yes, CRT presupposes that racism exists in all places, in all things, at all levels. Don't ask for proof of that, right? We just know that it's the case. So already you presume an outcome without evidence and move from that presumption. Maybe that's a problem. Thank you again, Derek LaRue. Appreciate it so very much. Derek LaRue, very generous of you as always. Hope you've had a good New Year's so far and that 2023 treats you well. Thank you again. And good morning to you.
And for some, therein lies the perceived controversy, resulting in the creation of anti-CRT legislation. In Wisconsin, the legislature passed a bill in January 2022 that would limit the discussion of racism in K-12 classrooms, including any teaching that, quote, an individual, by virtue of that individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Okay. And what is wrong with that? You're against that notion that someone should be assumed to be racist or sexist or oppressive simply on the basis of what they look like and their gender? Or is there something else going on here?
The bill was vetoed by Governor Tony Evers.
Okay, so it's not even a factor now. Okay, so lawmakers attempted to do something and it was struck down. Okay, so what's your complaint?
Critics of anti-CRT legislation say that if America desires a more equitable future, then we must be willing to acknowledge the atrocities of the past and their influence on the present.
Okay, well, there's two parts there. Acknowledge the atrocities of the past. Golly, I don't know. Have there been any documentaries? Has there been any legislation? Has there been any public declarations regarding the quote-unquote atrocities of the past? I seem to recall, I don't know, like Roots. How about Ken Burns' Civil War? How about any endless number of books talking about slavery and the internment camps and name it? America's sins, for the most part, have been laid bare again, again, and again, and again over time. So acknowledging the atrocities of the past isn't really an issue. But then there's that second part. Assuming that the people of today still think the same way as the people of the past, or somehow owe some kind of apology as individuals today for the actions of people in the past who just happen to have a passing resemblance to them on the basis of skin color. That's the problem. CRT is not just history. It is accusatory, guilt by association.
National Academy of Education president and professor emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings joins us to share more about the importance of CRT and its application in and outside of the classroom.
Oh, University of Wisconsin-Madison. I seem to recall having done a stream regarding that institution not too long ago and their questionable practices when it comes to diversity. But, okay.
So, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, I am Professor Emerita of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and that's just a fancy way of saying I'm retired, but I will confess I am failing at it. I am the world's worst retiree. I've been fascinated by the education of Black people in this country because it's such an incredible story. And so where I see inequities in that education, I always want to kind of probe it and explore it and try to make sense of it.
I appreciate you coming in to talk with us about a very important topic. For some, it's the topic when it comes to race right now.
Yeah, well, for some people it is, because some people are pushing racism in schools. I'm so curious to know, what does our speaker or our speakers have against the idea of not immediately condemning people as either racist or sexist or oppressive on the basis of what they look like? What is wrong with that notion? She put that statement out there as a quote from the legislation, but so far, and maybe we'll get there, but so far she hasn't provided any counter to why that is a bad notion.
CRT.
Well, and I want to be clear that the context that we are in right now, on the heels of some horrific massacres of people.
Are you going to bring up George Floyd? And here's the thing. If CRT's been around forever, then the context of right now is irrelevant if CRT has any legitimacy, right? It shouldn't matter the context. If it is a truism, if it is a healthy and or accurate way of seeing the world, then trying to dramatize it by saying, oh, because of right now, means nothing.
Mostly people of color.
Mostly? Wait. How much is mostly? Oh, so it's whatever you're talking about doesn't just happen to people of color? Oh, okay. Well, what happened to white privilege?
And clearly the one in Buffalo being driven by racial hatred.
Oh, right.
It's very timely to talk about this particular topic.
Oh, so you're going to take advantage of a massive tragedy to push your agendas. Oh, okay. That's fine.
But
wait, what? So how would critical race theory have prevented the Buffalo shooting? How would critical race theory have prevented the Buffalo shooting? Tell me that one.
Rather just saying to someone, oh, I study critical race theory, or what do you know about critical race theory? I often start with the question, tell me how you explain racial inequality.
So someone asks you a question and you answer with a question. Is that how that goes? How do I explain racial inequality? How do I explain racial inequality? Okay, well, there are different percentages of the population based on racial demographics. And depending on how you're measuring things, yeah, there will be a disparity between one or the other, simply based on the number of people that fall into those categories. But here's the question. Does a disparity inherently indicate an inequity? Because proving an inequity, something that is unjust, something that's unfairly pushed upon, that requires proof beyond just statistical divergences. That requires more than just saying number one is bigger than number two.
Because I think the explanation that one has really kind of makes them, puts them in a context for understanding the world.
Okay, so I have to explain to you how I explain racial inequity, and then you can know something about what, my character on the basis of my answer to your question in response to my question, hypothetically? Okay, so what is the correct answer? Right, if you ask me how I explain racial inequity, you'd have to be more specific first and foremost, not just say racial inequity, because that doesn't tell me anything. But that's going to tell you something about me. Okay.
So if your explanation is, well, people just need to work harder, millions of people need to work harder?
Maybe. Well, prove me wrong. I don't know. I mean, it might be a completely wrong answer, but you're the professor emeritus, so shouldn't you know? Shouldn't you be able to say that's wrong? I mean, is that incorrect?
I mean, think about it.
I'm really trying to think about it. You're the one that's supposed to be the expert. Tell me, I mean, just dissuade all the idiots out there when that is their answer. What is the correct answer?
If you start off by saying, well, there isn't any racial inequality, then I don't actually think I can have a debate with you because we don't see the world the same way.
How do you define inequality? Okay, you're going to need to get more specific. Using all these broad buzzwords doesn't tell me anything. Because I had the gender pay gap rammed down my throat for years on the basis of simply the difference between how much money is earned full-time by men versus women. And just saying, look, that number's bigger than the other one, obviously sexism. Okay, so I've had the God of the gaps theory of statistical analysis pushed at me over and over and over again, and it's nonsense on its face. So you need to explain it. You don't just sit back and judge what my uneducated and incompetent answer will be to a broad-based question like you've said, and then say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, then tell me what the truth is. Give me the evidence of what you're talking about.
On almost every social benefit, whether it is health, wealth, education, employment, we can see racialized disparity.
Does a disparity equate to an inequity all on its own? Yes or no? I'm glad you use the word disparity because that's a very specific concept that does not necessarily indicate that something unjust is taking place. Something unjust could be taking place depending on what you're talking about. But simply saying there's a disparity between racial demographics in different areas says nothing.
So how do we explain it?
Yeah. How do you explain it?
In a classroom with students, typically graduate students, I want to be clear.
Typically graduate students, you want to be clear. Okay, but CRT is not being taught in grade schools. The concepts and fundamentals of CRT are not being taught in elementary schools at all. You want to be clear. Why do you want to be clear? Why is it important for you to be clear about graduate schools? If it's just graduate schools, why do you care about the legislation? That's interesting.
I would probably say something like, well, it's not as if we haven't had explanations.
Then give me one.
We have.
Give me one.
From the time Black people arrived on these shores till about the mid-20th century, 1950s, our explanation was pretty much biogenetic.
Yeah, okay. And how relevant is any of that now? Did anything happen, per se, in, say, I don't know, 1964, that sort of set our country in a different direction by law than had been previous? What has that got to do with today?
So ingrained in our thinking that many universities, many colleges had departments and programs in eugenics.
Wow. And is that true today? Is eugenics an accepted science today? How about the phlogiston theory? How about the ether? How about the glass spheres of the universe? You know, there's a lot of things that used to be thought to have some accuracy in the world that have kind of gone by the wayside.
We said that was a science, that this group of people is biogenetically inferior.
Yeah,
now,
used to. And what are people thought of who say that kind of stuff today? How much legitimacy do people have who promote that stuff today? Thank you, Keldrig, so very much. Wow, thank you. A belated Merry Christmas, Scribe. And before you say anything about donating to a worthy cause, I match this donation for the GoFundMe. Keldrig, thank you so much. That is so nice of you. Thank you so much, Keldrig. That's great. Oh boy, I hope Rosebud and Twisted Skipster get all squared away soon, because poor little puppy. Not a good thing to have on a at the end of the year, the holidays and everything. And Twisted Skipster's family already has other concerns and things, and having a healthy puppy is even better. So thank you, Keldry. That's very generous of you. I appreciate it. And thank you guys so much. I mentioned this in a tweet the other day when I donated something to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. But just your generosity, I mean, this year, years previous, and to, the sort of, I'll just summarize the Lords of the Night collective, Monkey and Sinatra and Satsu and Weibo and, Polydub and everybody in the family that has been built up over the years. Thank you guys so much, both for your attendance and your participation, your generosity, and just tweeting things out. When you see somebody's stream is going live, even if you can't attend all the way through, letting people know it exists. Appreciate that. Oh, Script Doctor's in the chat. Hey, Script Doctor, how's it going? If you guys don't know Script Doctor, he is a professional script writer, and he fixes scripts. He also shows up on Midnight's Edge in several instances, and oh gosh, he's all over. I see him on different shows in that network all the time. And he does the occasional Diablo stream where he's killing demons in hell, because that's what Canadians are known for. So go check out Script Doctor. He appeared with me on a stream on my channel on Halloween or near Halloween with Tom Connors from Midnight's Edge. We talked about a proverbial sequel to the Final Nightmare. Or sorry, not the Final Nightmare. Wes Craven's New Nightmare. The Final Nightmare wasn't really the Final Nightmare. And then, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And so go check him out. Okay, now that I'm bumbling over myself, let's get back to it. Tell me again about how terrible everything is.
Now, I would imagine that a lot of thinking people did not buy into that well before the 1950s.
Yeah.
But I use the mid-1950s as a marker because it's at this point that we have the Brown decision. And Brown is a landmark decision. Everybody knows Brown versus the Board of Education.
Yes, if only it still held true today, because what are we seeing in schools? Affinity groups, affinity spaces, dividing up your students on the basis of race and assessing their capabilities and or their responsibilities for the historical grievances of the past. You know, hiring teachers on the basis of their skin color, because obviously you get a better education if your teacher looks a particular way, or a worse education if not. Yeah, if only Brown v. Board of Education was still being adhered to today.
However, from a critical race theory perspective, we don't see it merely as an education decision. We see it as a foreign policy decision.
What?
Because you have to put the legal cases, the Supreme Court cases, in a broader context. 1954 is the heart of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And part of the propaganda that the then Soviet Union is using is to say to non-aligned nations like Angola or India, you don't want to be associated with the United States. Look what they do to people who look like you. So that there's all these examples of lynching and dogs being sicked on people, failure to allow people to vote. So there is great pressure on the nation.
Right, we look bad.
To look better, right? Because the Soviets are exploiting this. I mean, you can find editorial cartoons, you can find op-eds all about look how the United States treats Black people.
Okay, so, let's accept for the moment, because I don't think it's necessarily untrue, that there was pressures and considerations beyond simply race, equity, and fairness going on, that the United States was trying to make itself look good. Does that undermine the efforts of everybody in the civil rights movement, everybody who died, everybody who put their lives on the line, who worked for legislation and everything else because of the true motivation behind it for actual equity and fair treatment of people, regardless of race? Is this a dig against the legitimacy of Brown v. Board of Education and future civil rights movements and legislation? It sounds like you're trying to undercut all that. Oh, well, it was politically motivated. It had nothing to do with fairness. That's what I'm getting from this. I'm curious to see where it goes.
So it's why not only did the decision have to come out in favor of Linda Brown and the plaintiffs, it needed to be unanimous. It needed to make a statement. So at that point, we're saying the problem is not biogenetic. The problem is lack of opportunity. That's a pretty good explanation.
It is.
Unfortunately, not long after that, Richard Nixon's administration, and in fact, I wrote a paper about the Brown decision in which I was able to find a statement from one of Nixon's part of his administration, H.R. Haldeman, who was also disgraced in the Watergate scandal. But you have Haldeman's diary in which he says, Nixon has told Mitchell, that's the Attorney General, to start filing cases to roll back Brown and keep filing it.
And was he successful? Or is Brown v. Board of Education still on the books? So H.R. Haldeman and people inside Nixon's administration were against civil rights and
filing them until it's totally rolled back. And so we have all these cases that come back. We have Milliken, we have Dow, we have San Antonio versus Rodriguez. So
what?
The opportunity explanations seemingly not holding up. Another example is voting rights.
The opportunity example is seemingly not holding up. Did I miss something? What are you talking about?
1960s, right? So that's an opportunity. What is happening now?
What?
Affirmative action. This is a Lyndon Johnson initiative.
Yeah, okay. And it was a bad idea. It completely countermands the whole idea of not considering people's value on the basis of their skin color. It may indeed soon be overturned by the Supreme Court, which I'm kind of looking forward to seeing the aftermath of, if that does take place.
And it has been fought over and over. The Fisher case, the Gratz and Grutter cases out of Michigan.
Yeah.
So critical race theory comes along, and it comes along in the late 1970s.
Yeah. Now, here's my question, because I don't honestly know. Is critical race theory, as originally conceived, how critical race theory is practiced today? Because people saying, oh, this isn't a new idea, this has been around forever. I kind of think to myself, that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me. Because a concept or a title can be come up with decades ago, and then someone can take that and run with it and turn it into something it was never meant to be or wasn't originally defined as. Because we've seen terms and phrases redefined over and over and over and over again, especially in the last 10, 15 years. Racism itself has been redefined several times to try to avoid the possibility that it can be practiced, quote unquote, by anybody other than white people. So when someone says, oh, critical race theory is not a new idea, it's been around forever. I really have to wonder, as it was conceived originally, is that how it is perceived and practiced today? Now, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'm curious to find out if our speakers tell us. But simply saying it's an idea that's been around forever, well, so has racism. That suddenly doesn't make it good because it's got tenure.
And that's part of the frustration for some, is that this isn't a new argument.
It doesn't matter the age. It matters the quality of the argument.
This has been around for decades.
No.
So
when people say they're trying to foment a revolution, I always say this is the slowest revolution I have been a part of.
If you take a bad idea from the dustbin of history, brush off all the detritus, and present it as something that is good, and just say, look, it's old, it's not new, well, then, heck, why isn't phrenology back in in the academy? Why aren't eugenics being practiced right now? You brought up eugenics before. It's an old idea. Does that give it some kind of legitimacy because it has age? Or does it matter the quality and the value of the actual argument being made?
I will be dead before we have any movement. But critical race theory comes about in law schools. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where they held these critical legal studies conferences.
Okay.
Those were folks who said, the way that law is taught and the way that we understand it doesn't take into consideration the situation and the condition of other people other than people who are already well established. And so was most.
What do you mean? I can imagine what you mean, but then I can imagine quite a bit. What are you talking about? What was the original critical race theory basis in law schools? How was it used to assess the prosecution of law? Now, what jurisprudence analysis was taking place? Don't just hand wave over that. This is critical race theory, but it's also critical to understand how we get from point A to the current day. And if you're not going to tell us, then I'm not quite sure if I can give you any credibility on the subject.
Mostly around people who are poor, women, and it was a group of Black legal scholars as well as other scholars of color who said, you guys have forgotten about race. So the critical race theorists emerged in these Wisconsin workshops. And what I find really interesting is people always want to make it a sort of black-white issue.
Oh, really? Who's making it a black-white issue? You guys are just making it a white, non-white issue. I mean, the lines of demarcation are very clear. It's very binary. Thank you, Matt Barnes. Did she mean folks or folks? I'll take my leave. I don't know. I don't know. Pronunciations, buzz terms, who knows? I mean, putting the X there means it's more inclusive somehow. I haven't done a video on Latinx lately. Maybe I need to find another Latinx video.
But I show people that among the major proponents are people like Richard Delgado, Marie Matsudo, Sumi Cho, Tomas Rivera. I mean, these are all folks who have done work in this area. They're not Black.
You know, there's a few people that died in the civil rights movement. You know, there's a few white guys that got killed by the Ku Klux Klan. There was an Italian lady that got killed by the Ku Klux Klan. They weren't Black. What are you talking about?
They're trying to figure out, how do we explain persistent, generational racial inequality?
Are you talking about inequality, or are you talking about disparity? This is a very, very important point, and it really depends on what you are talking about. Saying that there has been or is currently racial inequality, as in an injustice, is probably a true statement, no matter when you say it throughout history. Okay? Somewhere, in some aspect, people are being judged, devalued, or valued on the basis of their race. Somewhere, at some point, every instance of every day. You're correct. So you can never be wrong in making that statement without specificity. But you're going to have to get more specific. What are you talking about? And do you have evidence of inequality, or do you have evidence of a disparity? And a disparity does not indicate inherently an inequity unless you have evidence. This is what frustrates me so much. Simply saying there's racial inequality in this country. Probably. To what extent? In what area? In what way? Will you say? Rarely, if ever. And then, of course, if you do give a specific example and you try to, wheedle it down into its component parts, you often find that the problem isn't as much of actual active racism as you can prove. But you have to have racism be abundant. You have to have that victimhood always present, no matter what, in every way, shape, or form. You can't allow for the possibility, even by some reasonable measure, that we've progressed since 1954. We must always be stuck in the 50s, and people must continually be apologizing for the actions of people that died long before they were born. Anyway.
So in short, for someone who's never heard of CRT, or maybe has heard of it but doesn't really know what it means, what's the simple definition that you use to help people understand?
Okay.
Well, I try to tell people it is a legal look at racial inequality.
That is so incorrect for the modern day, I don't know what to tell you. That is not how it is promoted or used in schools. And this constant refrain that, oh, it's only an academic, it's only a university level kind of thing. Nothing about it ends up in elementary schools. Then why do you have a problem with legislation that prevents it from being taught in elementary schools? If it's not being taught or used in elementary schools, then it should be a nothing burger issue for you. And yet we see all this pushback, anti-CRT legislation. Well, what's wrong with that then?
Its whole point is to try to explain the inequality, try to make sense of it, because it really, after all of these years of having been in this nation, some of the longest standing people in the nation are Black.
If it's been around since the 70s, what is the explanation? If this theory, if this process has been around since the 1970s, it's been around for what now? Almost 50 years. Okay, what is the explanation? Do you need more than 50 years to answer the question of where does the racial inequality come from? What's the answer? You should know by now. I mean, is it a scientific theory? Is it a legal theory? Is 50 years not enough to have an answer? Point to the answer. What is the answer?
In some ways, I often say, who's more American than a Black person? Because we have deep and long.
Anybody who was born here or anyone who has gained citizenship here. I am as American as the next person down the street who is also a citizen of this country, either by birth or by becoming one. I don't assess people's Americanness on the basis of their race. Can you imagine someone saying who's more American than a white person and what kind of reaction they would and should get from any thinking individual these days? Are you kidding me right now?
Long roots here. So I think that the whole point of critical race theory is to try to make sense of why the inequality persists.
Why does it persist? It's had 50 some odd years to get the answer. What is the answer? And if you can identify the answer, well, then what is the solution?
So would you say that that is the current sort of reasoning that exists? Like we've graduated from all of these other points in time where we had other ways of thinking about inequality to now it's systemic. There's an issue with the system.
And we're saying it out loud. I don't know.
Yeah, no one before this moment has ever said out loud that there's a problem with the system when it comes to race. No one ever said there was a problem with the system. That whole Civil Rights Act thing that changed and refined the law to eliminate the parts of our country, legally speaking and otherwise, that would systemically discriminate against people. No one ever spoke out about that before. No one ever died fighting for those laws before. Nobody ever had their life ruined standing up and speaking out against the racist systems of the South and elsewise. No. No one ever said it out loud before about systems in this country that punish people on the basis of what they are. No, it's never happened. Oh my God, only now. Are you kidding me? Matt Barnes, thank you so much again. Would a Native American have a bone to pick with her? Asking for a friend. Hey, who's more American than fill in your racial demographic? It boggles my mind that a grown-up adult would say such a thing in this time, in this place, with the history that they are bemoaning. Who's more American than insert racial demographic? Give me a break here.
If you remember, but not too long ago, one of the major advertisers, I won't say it because I'll get it wrong, but one of the major advertisers.
It was so important and so significant you don't remember. Okay.
Did an entire series called The Talk,
uh-huh.
where Black parents you'd see these little snippets where Black people would tell their children, if you get stopped by the police, be polite. Don't let anybody call you such and such word. I mean, okay.
You know what my dad told me back when I was starting to learn to drive, even though I don't currently own a car. Well, I've never owned a car, but either way. You know, my dad told me, because my dad used to be a cop. Way back in the olden days, my dad was a police officer. And when he was trying to teach me how to drive, you know what he told me to do when a police officer pulled me over, if I ever got pulled over? Keep your hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, be polite and courteous, and do as the officer says. That's what he told me. He had the talk with me because he used to be a cop. He also had some idea of how quickly things can go sideways if you decide to be an idiot. So, what? Common sense advice from your parents. And
when did we all get together and have this conversation?
I had it with my dad. So what?
It turns out that that's part of our systemic understanding of this is the way it works.
Yeah. Interacting with law enforcement. This is the way it works. This is your prime example for justification of critical race theory. Someone talking to their child about how to interact with police at a traffic stop. Okay. You got anything else? Do you have any other prime examples you'd like to give us that justify this? Would you like to address your own statement at the beginning of this presentation where you were decrying a piece of legislation that was saying, don't assess someone as a bad person on the basis of their race or gender? What is your counterpoint to that? What's your rejoinder to that notion? Oh, but we have to assess who is a more American than someone else on the basis of their skin color. Oh, okay. Well, what other nuggets of wisdom do you have for us in this talk?
That, yeah, you do expect to have someone follow you around.
Oh, you do? Is that the kind of fear or paranoia that you instill in people? You should expect to be followed around. Okay.
Now, I remember teaching a class where students, and my work is not to make students think like I think.
Your work is not to make students think like you think. But, oh, by the way, who's more American than insert racial demographic? You want to talk about unconscious bias? You want to talk about microaggressions? Are you listening to yourself right now? Okay, what is your job as an educator? Because if I listen to this, if you were still in practice as a professor and I listened to this presentation, I would have some very serious concerns about sending my child off to be taught by you if you're telling us you know how the world works in secret ways and you're going to be the one teaching people. But then you say, oh, but my job isn't to teach people to think the way I think. Okay, is it to teach people how to think critically? Huh?
My work is to make sure they think.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to hear a well-reasoned, well-thought-out, well-substantiated conservative argument about something.
Oh, conservative? Oh, you had to throw that in there. Oh, okay. Okay. I'm happy to hear an argument, a well-thought-out conservative argument about something. Oh, okay. So you have to qualify it as anything that you happen to disagree with or disagrees with you. It must be a conservative argument. Oh, interesting.
More so than a knee-jerk liberal one.
Really? Really? Well, if only you would have somebody interviewing you who wasn't just a softball, nodding and smiling sycophant. I would love to see someone debate with you on your beliefs, on your statements here and elsewise. And you know what? Here's the thing. None of those counterpoints have to be inherently conservative. I'd really like to ask her about the whole who's more American than statement, because that one, man, that is something else. Take a second here. and see what you guys have to say. Renovatio, Scribelight, but she stated at the opening of the interview, if someone did not agree with her claim blacks are oppressed, she would not debate or hear them at all. That is also true. But she's, okay, but to be fair, she was saying a well-reasoned argument. Someone just saying racism doesn't exist or inequality doesn't exist. That is not a well-reasoned argument. So if that's what she was saying, I think that might have been what she was saying, then she's not wrong on that point. Right. But she certainly didn't sound like someone who was open to having a contrary opinion thrown her way. But she did qualify it here with reasoned argument. Now, I'd like to hear an example of a reasoned argument because there certainly are some. I don't know if she'll at least give that much up, but we'll see. Ham and Beans, Thomas Sowell would wipe the floor with this woman. Yeah, man, Thomas Sowell, if you guys haven't listened to Thomas Sowell's, monologues or debates or interviews, give them a listen. Just pick one random one about race in this country or politics or anything else. Whether you end up agreeing with him or not, you won't be able to deny that he has some of the most insightful and well-reasoned arguments out there. And again, even if you don't agree with him, I've listened to stuff before that was kind of like, I'm not quite sure about that. But I couldn't argue with his way of processing through the information. Similar to listening to Christopher Hitchens on anything political. It's like, I don't always agree with him on things, but I can't deny that he's thought them through. But Thomas Sowell specifically on race relations and in racism in this country and everything else, really worth the time. Really worth the time. Thank you, Matt Barnes. Did you expect anything less from an interviewer for Panhandler Broadcasting? Well, here's the thing. PBS, I haven't paid attention that much to PBS. I've done a couple of videos with some of their segments before, but I just found it interesting that public broadcasting taxpayer money was going into a presentation promoting CRT. Maybe that isn't anything new. I don't know. I haven't watched every PBS broadcast from every outlet in the country on this subject, but I just found it interesting that they're dedicating a whole half hour, 40 minutes or whatever, to essentially just giving CRT a pass. So it was interesting. But then, it's also University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they have a lot of pull in that part of the world. And as we've seen from previous streams, UWM has a perspective on the world, let's just say.
I want you to be thinking.
Yeah.
So we had a discussion once where a young lady talked about she was in a store, a local store.
Was she being followed? Did she have an anecdote about how someone was paying attention to her and she assumed it was about race? Is that it?
Purchasing groceries, and she'd left her checkbook. And the manager or the cashier, I'm not sure who, told her, oh, not a problem. Take your groceries, and when you come back by, you can pay.
Oh, she forgot her checkbook. I thought you were like, she walked out and left her checkbook in the store. Okay, so she went to the grocery store and she forgot her checkbook. So the guy let her walk out without paying. Okay.
Well, a black student in this class said, well, that wouldn't happen to me.
Well, what if the store owner knew you very well? Like, I've gone to the same grocery store, which is only a couple of blocks from my apartment, for the last 15 years. I know the people that work there by name, right? Now, if I walked into the grocery store and I suddenly couldn't pay, well, I wouldn't take the groceries personally. I put them back on the shelf and I'd come back when I could. That's just me. And that's probably also corporate policy, right? But okay, this wouldn't happen to me because I'm black. So this guy immediately decided that the people at the grocery store were going to be racist. That was the student's interpretation of that story. Who's at fault in that analysis? And you're laughing about this. You find that funny? Okay.
She said, no, it would. They're really nice there. And he says, I'm telling you, it would not happen.
Because everybody there is racist. I know everybody's racist because racism is in every aspect of society and every level of existence.
So they went back and forth. And so he said, let's do this because I do live in your neighborhood. We know each other. The next time I need to go to the store, I'm going to call you and I'm going to have you go with me. And I'm going to purchase what I need to purchase, go through the cashier's line, but I'm going to say that I don't have my wallet. They did it. And as soon as he said he didn't have his wallet, he was told, okay, well, put the groceries over there on the side. And then when you go home and get your wallet.
And then come back.
So she was mortified.
She was mortified. She was mortified. Really? Because she was white? Did you, I live in your same neighborhood. Well, are the circumstances the same? Or is it because he was black? If it was anybody else who came into that store and wasn't a regular and didn't know anybody, they just let them walk out just because they're nice? Or is this person a regular customer that they know by name and has been there forever and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I have a feeling there's part of the story that's not being told here. I have a feeling. But regardless, most grocery stores are going to say the exact same thing regardless of your skin color. Now, who knows why that girl got a pass, if that's even true. But the obvious answer is race. Here again, we have an example of a disparity. One person is given the option that another person is not. What is the difference between these two people? Well, one's a girl, one's a guy. One is, I'm assuming white, she never says so far, and the other guy's black. Does this indicate an inequity or a disparity in outcomes? Certainly it's a disparity. Does that mean the guy's being treated badly because he's black? He's not being told, you can't buy that. He's not being told, you can't come back to this store. He's being told, well, when you can buy the thing, you can come back and get the thing. But obviously it's race.
Because it was this local family group. It wasn't a chain, right?
Okay, so a local family, it wasn't a chain. All right, well, how well did the place know this girl versus this guy?
And it was like, why would they let me just, So
did they know her by name? Did she come in every day for 15 years and she's never done anything untoward? Is familiarity not a factor you could take into consideration here? Oh, it's obviously the store is racist. Of course. This mom and pop store that's in this community, they're racists. Well, thank you for that explanation, lady. It's the simplest explanation. It requires no critical thinking. Obviously, it's race. It's not familiarity. It's race.
So it's those kinds of aha moments.
Oh, it's an aha moment. Oh, right. Because you've leapt to a conclusion. You leapt to a conclusion. You don't know that they're racist, but they must be racist because the only way I can see these two people, the girl and the guy, is on the basis of their skin color.
Often some colleagues and I say, we'll call each other about something and someone will say, I had a CRT moment. In other words,
I had an anecdote come my way that was interpreted to be racist, and it was a CRT moment. You know, CRT, that really high-minded, high-level legal definition. Yeah, no, now we've whittled it down to just assumptions about racial dynamics. Okay.
It's just one of those things that's happened again.
I so appreciate that example.
I'm sure you do appreciate that example. It requires no critical thinking. It requires no questions being asked. It requires nothing but the assumption of a conclusion that was presupposed before it was even enacted. Yeah, I'm sure you appreciate that example. I really do. I'm sure you appreciate that example. That's a great example.
Not only because it's relatable, but because it does help to kind of simplify the conversation.
Oh, yeah, it simplifies the conversation. It went from this university level legal theory that only law professors talk about. It's obviously not taught in elementary schools. But now I'm going to give you an example without any evidence. Speaking of which, it's a legal theory. And what does the legal process require? Evidence. Evidence. Oh, but now this is a CRT moment. You know how scary that is? If you are a professor or an advocate for this high-minded legal theory, university level, graduate level legal theory, and you can simplify it down to a proof on the basis of an anecdote without context. Wow. Wowie, wow, wow. In fact, I think that deserves an official
wowie, wow, wow.
Yeah.
And although I can see some people taking that, especially the grocery store example, and saying, well, oh, that particular person that was working is racist.
Oh, what other conclusion am I supposed to take from that? You were laughing and smiling and saying how relatable it was. What other conclusion should I draw from that?
Versus calling attention to the system.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you help someone kind of delineate between, like, there's individual racism? Yes, we don't want to ignore that. But systemic racism is way more insidious in some ways because it can fall under the radar in ways we don't always recognize.
You are assuming the store owners were racist. There is no other, without evidence, without knowing who these people are, without having any evidence of patterns of behavior elsewise, you are assuming a racist conclusion. You have just done so. You have condemned whoever these people are as being racists, as assessing people on the basis of their skin color first, foremost, and only. You don't even know the race of the store owners, but that's enough for you. That is enough for you to make that conclusion. And you're pushing what you keep qualifying as a legal theory. The legality of assessing people first and foremost on their skin color. Are you listening to yourselves?
Well, I don't deny individual racism, but racists grow up in a context.
Oh, now context matters. You don't deny individual racism. Well, you know, like, who are more, what persons are more American than black people? I don't deny individual racism either. I'm watching it on display.
So let's go back to the Buffalo Massacre.
The Buffalo Massacre. Yeah, okay, tell us, how would CRT have solved the Buffalo Massacre?
In that individual, yes, I'm going to buy that he's mentally ill. Anybody who would shoot up people like that is mentally ill.
Uh-huh.
But what's the context that was feeding his mental illness?
Was it CRT? Oh, no, wait, sorry. CRT is obviously not promoting racism. What was fueling his mental health?
Well, when we check his computer, he's in all kinds of hate groups.
Yeah.
When we see the manifestos, what his whole point was.
Yeah. What does that have to do with CRT? What does any of that have to do with CRT? You want to tell us about the Dallas massacre of police officers by a black nationalist? What does any of that have to do with CRT? Does it have something possibly more to do with CRT than the Buffalo shooting? I don't know. You tell me. A racially motivated shooting massacre. And?
So it's a both and situation. There are individual people who are racist, but there's a context that feeds into that racism.
Yeah, like assessing white people as being guilty for the sins of dead white people. That's a context. Do you want to talk about that context?
That happens systematically.
Yeah, like teaching CRT in schools. That kind of systematically.
And so I brought up the individual racism part because I feel like that's somehow tied to the opposition, like the current opposition, because like you mentioned, CRT is not new.
You guys keep... The age of a bad idea does not somehow make it a better idea over time. Bad ideas don't get better like wine. If it starts out as vinegar, it remains vinegar. Stop falling back on it's not a new idea. That means nothing.
It's been around for decades. It's provided
a legit explanation behind why there are disparities still, because some people like to believe that that was so long ago.
No. Anybody who says there are no disparities between the races is patently wrong. You use the word disparities. That just means that there is a difference from one thing to another. That percentage A is larger or smaller than percentage B. That's a disparity, a difference. What is the explanation behind that difference? That's where you are assuming a conclusion without evidence and using only the factors of the disparity and the category they fall into to make the declaration of an answer. That's what you're doing. You're not solving anything. You're just perpetuating a conspiracy theory that any disparity between racial demographics must be racism. Do you have anything else to offer?
Why are we not XYZ? Well, the system didn't change this whole time, so why would things generally improve for a group of people?
What system didn't change? What system has not changed, quote unquote, over time? Give me an example. Give me a current, recent example of a system that is inherently and demonstrably racist. I mean, it wouldn't take more than about 3 seconds. You guys have already talked about one. It's called affirmative action. But, of course, setting that one aside, because that's virtuous racism for some reason, name a system. Like in America right now, name a system that is inherently and provably racist. Okay? And if you do, I will be right there by your side calling for that system to be reformed and examined and investigated and prosecuted. It's all I've done on my channel all these years. If something is so demonstrably unfair that you can point to black letter law in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and elsewise and say, boy, oh boy, that's racist, I'm right there with you. Been doing it a long time. Give me an example. I know they exist. I've seen several of them. But what are you talking about?
The system was never designed to benefit. But I guess I'm curious, from your vantage point, why now?
So let's be clear. Much of what people are, quote, against is not critical race theory.
Oh, that's what I keep being told. Okay, well, what am I incorrectly against when it comes to critical race theory? Why did the statement in the piece of legislation at the top of this presentation that said that students should not be assessed as oppressive, racist, or sexist simply on the basis of their appearance, what is wrong with that sentiment? How does that absolutely defy the principles behind the Civil Rights Act or the statements by, let's say, Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech, those fundamental principles of how we should treat one another? Okay, what do we get wrong about critical race theory?
When you say, oh, I'm against anything that's, this anti-racism, well, that's really not critical race theory.
Have you listened to anti-racist rhetoric? Anti-racism presumes that racism is a universal constant. It is in all things, in all systems. It is endemic to our society. It is ingrained in American history. It cannot be undone. It can only be acknowledged and pushed back against. How is that in any way, shape, or form contradictory to what you guys have already said? How? How is anti-racism not related, or, in fact, even an outgrowth of critical race theory?
We've been doing anti-racist workshops for a very long time.
A very long time. Again, something's been going on for decades. That means it's legitimate. You know, like communism. It's been around a long time, guys. It's going to work eventually, we swear.
When you say you don't want to have any discussion on race, when you say we don't want white children to feel bad. You know, when I first heard that, I thought, well, my God, where were you in the 1950s and 60s when I was in school?
Well, aren't you glad that they're here now? Aren't you glad that people are pushing back against the idea of demonizing people on the basis of their race? No, the 50s and 60s. What happened in 1964, lady? Why are you laughing? Why is this funny? Where were you back then? I don't know. Given your age, they probably weren't even born yet. But aren't you glad that they're here now saying we shouldn't vilify people, especially children, on the basis of their race, or teach them to vilify themselves or others on the basis of their race? Why are you guys laughing at this? How is this not progress in your mind? Or are you for telling children to feel bad about themselves on the basis of their race? Why is this funny to you?
Because I had to sit through honors English classes reading Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn with the liberal use of the N-word.
Oh, the liberal use of the N-word, which was historically accurate for the setting of the story. Oh my gosh. Did you also read To Kill a Mockingbird? Did you also read a story set in a place and a time where people thought and acted in a particular way? And that story was an accurate representation, more or less, of the people at the time? So what? You were mistreated when you were a child, unfairly, on the basis of your skin color. And that is wrong. That is a absolute and total wrong and injustice. Aren't you glad that things have changed? Aren't you for the idea of not vilifying children on the basis of their race? And what, should Huckleberry Finn be banned because of the language used in it, reflecting a time and a place where that language was used? What were the lessons of Huckleberry Finn on race relations, by the way? Who was Jim to Huckleberry Finn? What?
And all of my white classmates sniggling and giggling, all right? I had to sit through Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind.
Okay, and so what? You were mistreated in the past. Things were a particular way in the past. They can't be undone, and they were wrong. And thankfully, things changed. So what do you have against people now saying, don't vilify children on the basis of their race? What is your point?
Nothing about education is about just making you feel comfortable. Sometimes we learn the most in the midst of discomfort.
Oh, so children should be made to feel bad on the basis of their race? What? What are you talking about right now? Discomfort's good? Oh, so what you went through was a positive thing then? Is that it?
So I think what's happened is this broad net has been cast. And if you go back and look at some of the architects of the anti-CRT work, you see the strategy was brilliant.
What?
So you have someone like Christopher Rufo, who is at the Manhattan Institute, who says, and I want to make sure I say this pretty carefully.
Okay, you want to be sure you're very careful about this. By all means, tell us about Christopher Rufo.
But he says, we're going to take all of the cultural insanities that Americans dislike. Now think about that. What's a cultural insanity and who are the Americans?
Right.
What are you, okay. First off, I have no context for this quote, and I have no idea what she's talking about. We're going to take all the cultural insanities and what? Oh my gosh. Anyway, thank you, Chicago Mike. Happy New Year, Scribe. When do we get a WTF on this interview? Man, I should have by now. I really should have. I really should have. A couple of times. Okay. Cumulative for this presentation so far, and we still have a few minutes left.
What? What is that? What the fuck is that?
Okay, so you haven't explained anything about what CRT actually is. You haven't entertained or even given a reasoned explanation of what the opposition says about it. And even now, when you bring up Christopher Rufo, you quote him, I think, I guess, I have to assume, and they don't even explain what he's talking about. I'm going to back up a little bit, give her one more chance here, and then let it flow and see what she has to say.
Is at the Manhattan Institute, who says, and I want to make sure I say this pretty carefully, but he says, we're going to take all of the cultural insanities that Americans dislike.
Take and do what with them?
Think about that. What's a cultural insanity?
I don't
and
know.
Who are the Americans?
Right.
I don't know.
We're going to take all the cultural insanities that Americans dislike
Yeah.
and lump them into the category of critical race theory. We're going to turn the brand toxic. So
Turn the brand toxic. Critical race theory. Going to turn it toxic. So CRT isn't toxic, but we're going to turn it toxic. By we, do you mean advocates for CRT, or are you talking about Christopher Rufo and his followers? There's too much ambiguity
So
here.
now anything that deals with race, inequality, diversity, equity, inclusion is now all critical race theory.
Well, then explain critical race theory. You were asked to explain it, and you gave us an example of a grocery store. You simplified it down to the most minuscule, simple, non-specific examples ever, but you didn't give us an actual explanation for what it is. It was a legal theory, and it was developed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And what? You need to explain critical race theory, and you need to list off some of the common misconceptions about critical race theory, and then tell us why those misconceptions are, in fact, misconceptions. That's how you would do this properly. I haven't heard any of that so far.
So when we can't talk about all of history, as James Baldwin says,
who is preventing you from talking about history? Name a period in time that is disallowed from discussion. Go ahead. Tell me about any period, any year, any era in American history, since that's our focus here, that is disallowed from discussion, that you are not allowed to discuss. And is that what the anti-CRT movements or legislations or proponents or whatever, is that what they are saying, that you can't discuss history? Or are they a little wary of putting a spin on history and a conclusion and interpretation on history that inherently vilifies kids and people on the basis of their skin color? Which is it?
he says, if you feel compelled to lie about any part of the history, you're likely to lie about it all.
Yeah, so tell us about the 1619 Project. Tell us all about the 1619 Project. If you're liable, if you're willing to lie about some of history, you're liable to lie about it all. Tell us about the 1619 Project, that famed CRT DEI revelation.
That's the danger, kind of. You mentioned the danger of kind of compromising how we approach education, and not only like demonizing history, but also.
Who is demonizing history? You guys are not addressing the central complaint. You bring up, let's not make white children feel bad about being white. And then you don't even address how that is a perfectly reasonable place to be. You go back to how you were mistreated because of your skin color. Okay, so you agree with people who say that now, right? Where were you when I was a kid? Probably didn't even exist. This is so nonsensical.
Demonizing the explanations that are made available as to why.
No. It's demonizing a conclusion of assessment of character on the basis of skin color. and holding people today accountable for the sins of people in the past who just happen to look like them. That's not a conclusion, that's an accusation. That is a guilt by association. If you want to conclude how events led up to historical events or what can be learned from them, that's one thing. But to make your conclusion a vilification or an assessment of an entire demographic on the basis of what they look like and for no other reason, that's where you're off. That's where you're no different than certain regimes of the past that decided to vilify entire peoples on accusations of wrongdoing by their ancestors. I don't know what else to tell you. And you haven't disproven any of it so far.
Why things are the way they are. So then you have students coming into classrooms and teachers not being equipped to even discuss what's happening right now. So like, what can we offer if we can't talk about the reasons why these very impactful, triggering, traumatizing things are happening without those tools that we're saying no?
Right.
Like what? Like what is being denied teachers in discussing, since this seems to be your fetish right now, the Buffalo shooting? What is being denied? If a teacher even wanted to bring that up in an elementary school, even though, oh, sorry, we're not even talking about elementary schools. We're talking about universities. CRT is only in universities. These tools are being denied us, even though CRT is not being used in regular elementary schools with regular kids and things. No, it's only for university level. Oh, but we have to protect the tools necessary for teachers to use CRT in the place where it's not used. But okay, let's just set all of that contradiction aside. What is being denied any teacher at this point in time when this is recorded, or right now, from discussing the Buffalo shooting and what the suspect did and what the suspect believed and how what the suspect believed was wrong or informed by racist agendas, and how racism, regardless of who's doing it, is wrong? What is being denied? Name a tool, name a part of history that is being disallowed from being used. Give us a specific example. If it is so rampant, if it is so obvious, why can't you name a specific example?
You know, and our founders, you know, these are really smart guys. These are
our founders? What a
smart men. Thomas Jefferson's someone I just find fascinating.
Oh, is it because he was so brilliant about freedom and equality and the law and the Declaration of Independence? But he owned slaves. And you don't think we've addressed that by now?
I've got good things to tell you about Thomas Jefferson, but there's contradictions.
What?
Because at the same moment he is writing these magnificent words, we hold these truths to be self-evident. He's got a woman, an enslaved woman, with whom he is procreating.
Oh my God! And that has what to do with today? That has got what to do? Have we, you know, it is really, really tragic. And it's really, really embarrassing because ever since Thomas Jefferson was alive, we've never addressed slavery. We've never addressed indentured servitude. We've never addressed racial inequality in this country. We all behave today as Thomas Jefferson did then, because Thomas Jefferson, everything about him, everything, not just his ideas and his ideals, but everything about Thomas Jefferson is the model of a modern American person. As we know, you know, obviously the smart thing to do in life is to venerate people as deities because they are perfect in every way, shape, or form. There's no contradictions. There's no flaws. There's nothing that can be learned from. They just absolutely are. And the founding fathers, oh man, carved in marble to be worshipped as perfect, infallible creatures. That's why the Constitution can't be revised, as you know. Right? It's an unalterable document. Everything that they thought at the time, everything that they practiced, everything that they actually did, we do today. I've got my wooden dentures in right now. Wow. Hey, Professor Emeritus, you want to talk about, I don't know, gosh, Native American slavery? What about Native American tribes taking and keeping slaves? What about African tribes keeping and taking slaves, selling slaves even? Oh, so who should I hold accountable today for those actions? How should I assess people today for the behavior and the policies and the cultural norms of several hundred years ago? Anybody else you want to put on that list? Or should I assess people today on the basis of themselves, their actions, their character, and not on their skin color, and not on their gender, and not on who they decide to sleep with? How about that notion? Thomas Jefferson was a hypocrite and a slave owner. So what?
I don't know what the nature of their relationship is.
Well, you do. One was a slave and one was a slave owner. That's pretty clear, right? What other context do you need?
But I know that in his notes from Virginia, he talks about Black people not being anywhere equal to white people, and that the best thing we can do is just get rid of them. Whoa, you're making more of them.
Uh-huh. And this justifies critical race theory.
So there is this incredible contradiction. Should I not say that George Washington was, number one, more interested in farming than governing? And that's pretty well documented.
Okay, ma'am, and I'm being completely sincere right now. Who has stopped anyone from pointing out the contradiction between Jefferson's words and his actions? Who? Who is stopping you from saying that? How are you in that chair reciting this well-known piece of history if no one's allowed to talk about that? What school teacher is disallowed from pointing out the contradictions and hypocrisies of the founding fathers as compared to the documents they prepared in creating this country? Tell me who. Tell me where it is written. Tell me where in the legislation that was decried at the beginning of this presentation that it says, "Thou shalt not tell the truth about Thomas Jefferson." Where? If it is there, if it's actually there, I'm on your side. Silencing history should not be allowed. But you need to tell me where that is occurring.
He wrote about back and forth to his farm every day that he was in the White House. Mount Vernon was his passion.
Yeah, George Washington was, by all accounts, a very reluctant general and politician. He would much rather be a normal, quiet man living on his own, away from all of the hubbub. You're right. The people probably most suited for power are those that don't want it. It's one of the admirable qualities of George Washington, really. But I'm sure that he had his faults. Did you know that Martin Luther King Jr. is accused of having cheated on his wife? Gosh, I guess that makes his sentiments in his "I Have a Dream" speech immediately irrelevant and vetoed and wrong. Because the person who said the thing was fallible, therefore their ideas are also immediately toxic. Or can I take a principle absent the person who created said principle or espouse such a principle and apply it, even if the source or its main advocate turns out to be not a perfect being? Is it possible?
Should I not say that when he was president, And remember, the capital was in Philadelphia at this time. It's not in Washington, D.C.
No. It's not a matter of should you not say. Are you not allowed to say? And who is saying you should not be allowed to say it?
See, Pennsylvania had an ordinance that said you could not, if you were enslaved and you came to Pennsylvania, at the end of 60 days, you had to be manumitted. You had to be set free. Washington brought his slaves with him to Philadelphia. And on day 59,
didn't stay
they went back to Maryland.
Who is preventing you from saying that? Who is preventing any teacher in this country from saying that to their students? Tell me. Tell me where it is written that you are not allowed to say that fact about George Washington. Tell me. And I will be right there with you opposing anybody who would say you cannot teach history. You cannot mention facts about the Founding Fathers. Because last I checked, the Founding Fathers are not enshrined in protection under law of having the facts of their life being told to students. And still, what does this have to do with CRT? Are you saying that George Washington's playing around with the laws of Pennsylvania and his slaves has a direct connection to how we treat ourselves and others today? If so, I would love to see that chain of evidence. Is that what CRT teaches? Tell us. Tell us how Washington's playing around with the rules to make sure his slaves were always slaves is relevant right now. How the Buffalo Massacre is a result of George Washington playing hockey with his slaves.
And then they came back on day 61 and started the clock all over again.
Wow. And so what?
Now, you've got to be thinking about this. You can't just be thinking, oh, well, okay, so y'all are not, slaves anymore.
Wait, you mean that's not important? That's not a pretty big change since the time of George Washington that slavery has been outlawed? Okay, what else should I be thinking?
These contradictions, these human flaws.
Yeah.
Are part of making these people real to our students.
Yeah. And how many different times can I say it? Show me where in the legislation cited at the top of this presentation that it says, thou shalt not report facts about the Founding Fathers that may be disparaging to their memory to students. If it's there, then I'm right there with you. Okay? If you can cite for me the passage that says that, I'm right there with you. But notice how that is not what was cited at the top of the presentation. At the top of the presentation, the only passage cited had to do with assessing students and their character on the basis of their race. That teaching students that certain people are inherently bad, oppressive, racist, sexist on the basis of their own race and or gender. Where's the part of the legislation that says the Founding Fathers are infallible and shall not be disparaged at all? Show me where that is, please.
And not turning them into idols.
I think the extremes can happen on either end.
Oh, really? Are we going to go on a both sides thing here now? Oh boy, do tell.
Because we're all flawed, whichever end of the spectrum we may land on. So I love that you highlight, like, okay, there may be some good here or something here that is worth discussing, but let's not ignore, like you're saying, the flaws or the contradictions.
What? She hasn't said anything. What is that? Proves what? That says what about what?
What? What is that? What the fuck is that?
I think it's important for us to understand that if we don't get to a place where we can actually hear one another.
What?
where we can actually express our deepest fears and concerns.
What?
We tear at the fabric of the nation.
Who is stopping you from doing that? What are you talking about?
And CRT was never designed to do that.
What is it designed to do? Tell us what it is designed to do. You still haven't done that.
And for a special group who might just feel tired, like you said, this isn't anything new. This has been going on for so long.
Yes, racism is an old idea and CRT promotes it. And?
What would you say to that audience?
The historian in me always takes the long view.
Does it? The historian in you takes the long view. Okay. Then why didn't anything that happened since George Washington matter? Why are you giving us no perspective or proportionality in how things are today versus the time of Thomas Jefferson?
I am from a family in which my great-grandparents were chattel slaves. And I'm inspired by sort of the father of CRT, Derek Bell, who says, just because something is impossible doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
Okay. What is impossible? In that rendition of things, what is it that is impossible? Slavery? Outlawed. Structural, institutional, legal, racial discrimination? Outlawed. Is it still practiced? Obviously. But at least it's on the books. At least there's some kind of mechanism there. What is impossible?
So my great-grandparents were in an impossible situation. They were in bondage.
Yeah.
But I bet every day they thought about, how can we get out of this?
Yeah.
And so then my grandparents, on both sides, mother's side and father's side, were sharecroppers.
Uh-huh.
An impossible situation. You could never get out of sharecropping. You could never get ahead. You could never own property. It was impossible. But they still fought against it.
Well, but it wasn't impossible. I mean, for their individual situations, yeah, but it wasn't impossible. What are you talking about?
Then my own parents grew up in state-sponsored segregation, legal apartheid.
Yeah, like affinity groups and affirmative action. You know, or DEI processes in corporations and other institutions. Legalized segregation.
My mother could not try on a hat in a downtown department store.
Mm-hmm.
An impossible situation where you have to sit in the back of a bus and you have to knowingly go to a substandard school if you got to go to school. Impossible. But they fought against it.
Yeah, you know. And is it impossible to not assess people on the basis of their skin color? Except that's what you're doing here. And you did it most pointedly just a few minutes ago when you said, who's more American than a black person? I don't think it's impossible to get back or get to a point where, in general, and culturally speaking, we assess skin color on the same level as hair color and eye color when judging a person's worth, value, or character. I really do believe we can get there. I don't think it's impossible because I've seen it. Because I practice it. Because I know others who do as well. I know others who look at this stuff as ridiculous. So I know it's not impossible. It's going to be a bitch to slog through to get to that point, hopefully. But I see nothing, and I have heard nothing from our speakers that tells me that they're on the side of that ideal. That's what's disappointing.
So then here I am.
Yeah, here you are.
An endowed professor.
Yeah, how is that possible?
With 10 honorary degrees.
10 honorary degrees? You're gonna like kind of wince at that, right?
Go back to my great-grandparents, right?
So you were handed 10 degrees without earning them.
So people who are willing to fight against the impossibility, who understand that just because it's impossible doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
Okay, so you are evidence that we've made progress. Is that it? You and your 10 honorary degrees. Whatever. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. So things are different now than they were in Thomas Jefferson's day, in the time of your great-grandparents, in the time of your grandparents, in the time of your own parents. Things have changed. But CRT is still necessary. And you haven't at all answered the concern. As stated previous, we shouldn't be making kids feel bad for being white. Where were you when I was a kid? That's not an answer. That's not even a defense. But okay, you've got your 10 honorary degrees. You do, of all people. Okay. You're a retired professor emeritus. Yeah?
Is what encourages and emboldens me. My expectations for the next generation and the generation beyond that are quite high.
Are they?
Because I know we have this capacity.
Who's we?
In fact, our youth don't even think about race the same way we do.
You don't say. So why are you for CRT, which is teaching kids to assess themselves on their skin color? It does the exact same thing as you went through when you were a kid. It's the same mechanism. You are stained by your melanin count. In some way, shape, or form, you are determined to be a particular way or a particular worth or particular guilt or particular victim or particular villain because of what you look like. That is what CRT is pushing in elementary schools, which you guys keep dancing around that fact or trying to avoid it. You haven't addressed what is wrong with the legislation being proposed, and you haven't contradicted the idea that kids should be vilified because they're white. What was the purpose of this? It was to educate us on CRT. I don't feel educated about CRT. I feel very educated about our speaker and how she doesn't have an answer for anything. And 10 honorary degrees.
And so that's encouraging.
Wow.
Are you wiping away a tear? About what?
You're making me tear up a little bit with
For what?
your breakdown, but that is so true.
What?
Thank you for that.
What for
You're welcome.
what?
And with that, thank you so much for joining me today. I've so enjoyed our conversation. I feel like I could talk with you
for
all
having
night.
me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Critical race theory is one framework to acknowledge the foundations of racism in the United States.
No, it's not. I'll back up. It is one framework. I'll give you that. It's built out of popsicle sticks, but it's just one framework. Yeah, it's really old too, guys, which means it's got verisimilitude because it's old or something. Like, Jesus.
And its impact today.
Yeah.
Regardless of any discussion around education policy,
What?
there's a painful yet very real history that exists for Black Americans, as well as other historically marginalized communities.
Wait, outside of education, this is all about educational policy. You keep saying that educators are being denied the ability to say certain things. When it seems more likely they're being encouraged not to make assessments and conclusions about people today based on the actions of people in the past. That's what you have a problem with, seemingly. You didn't even address that part. Why did you bring up that quote from the legislation if you were not going to answer it? If you were not going to analyze that portion of it? Or the thrust of the argument from the anti-CRT legislation? What was wrong with that piece of the legislation? You never said.
This series is called Why Race Matters.
Oh, yeah.
Because we acknowledge that.
You acknowledge that race matters. You know who race matters to the most? Racists. Race doesn't matter. Race, say it with me. Race doesn't matter. The only reason to analyze racism is to see its stupidity, to see its fallibility, to see its limitations, to see its base and barbarous stupidity. That's it. Might be a little energized right now.
While highlighting those in our state working to hold systems, structures, and ourselves accountable to create a more equitable Wisconsin.
Yeah, except who's the more American in Wisconsin right now? How do we know who the more American is, according to our professor emeritus? What evidence do I need of who is more American? Thank you, Ever Jance. Wow, wipes away tear. Our work here is done. I know, gosh, so stunning, so brave, so amazing. Renovatio. Imagine a white person sitting in that chair and saying exactly what she has just said about why race matters. Imagine the mainstream media, the politics, and academia's response. Yes. Yes. There is a symbol in symbolic logic. I've talked about this before, and I apologize if you've heard it before, but I'm going to say it again. It is an equal sign, but not quite an equal sign. There's 3 bars, not 2. And if you put an A on one side and a B on the other, that 3-barred equal sign says effectively this. These 2 things are different on their face. However, they are so similar as to be indistinguishable from one another. So, A, you have a black person sitting in that chair saying those very same words and sentiments, and B, you have a white person sitting in that chair saying those very words and those sentiments. Now, it is 2 different instances. There is a difference there between the skin color of the one and the skin color of the other. However, the actual content of what is being done doesn't change. And the only conclusion you can come from that is that if you find it offensive in the one instance, there's nothing different about it being said in the other instance. Okay, that's assessment. That's looking at something rationally and logically. Because it's all just window dressing. What is being told? What is being said? What is being taught? Okay, racial identitarianism is poison. It doesn't matter who's promoting it. Because if you're going to whittle everybody down to nothing more than their skin color and make an assessment of them on that basis, guess what? You are a racist. It doesn't matter what you look like. You could be a racist against your own race. You'd still be a racist. You could stand on a stage and grovel and complain and whine and apologize forever for just how terrible you are because of what you look like. And you'd be a racist. Anyway, so there you go. There's Wisconsin PBS, quote unquote, teaching, unquote, us about CRT. Shadow Sonata, obsessive focus on race is like failing to see the forest fire because you would rather look at the bark on the tree. Who someone is should matter, not what. Exactly. Exactly. Scannerd Athlete, I'm still laughing about the honorary degree thing. I mean, seriously, if I was going to bring up my CV, if I mentioned them at all, it would be a secondary part. I'd talk about my actual degrees, the ones that I earned. This is what commended me to become a professor in the first point. My master's degrees in XYZ PDQ. 10 honorary degrees, like consolation prizes. I mean, yeah. And don't get me wrong, someone who has, I don't know, achieved a certain level and some institution wants to like honor them because of this, that, or the other. I'm not saying it's inherently bad, but it wouldn't be the first thing I'd come out with if I'm going to talk about what my credentials are. It's a nice to have. It's very thoughtful of a place to do something like that. I might be proud to be recognized by an institution, right? If I got an honorary degree of letters from a college or something because I'd written a bunch of books on a subject that were well received or well thought of. Okay, it's a very nice gesture. I wouldn't mark it up as an accomplishment. It's an honor. P. Farnsworth 84. The fact she makes no mention of any other degrees leads me to think she doesn't have any earned ones. Or I don't know, or that she doesn't consider those nearly as important or something. Or maybe for her example, maybe she was trying to say, okay, I'll walk it back a second. Maybe she was trying to say that she was honored by 10 different institutions. I'm assuming 10 different institutions. And that is in contrast to her parents and her grandparents and her great-grandparents who were by society in general thought of as second-class citizens. If that's the point she was making, okay. It sounded kind of funny the way that she said it. I'd rather put something up as merit. But if she's just talking about like admiration from society despite her skin color, okay, there might be a point to be made there. But again, the way that she said it just sounded really silly. Like when you talk about Brown v. Board of Education at the top of the deal, why not highlight your earned and prestigious master's degrees or PhDs in something else that showed that the educational system has changed to the point where even someone like you, as compared to what happened in the past, achieved the same rank as anybody else on the basis of your own merit? That to me would seem more reasonable and substantive, Irate Bear, than talking about 10 honorary degrees. But okay, whatever. Let's see. Data Wasteland. The real crazy thing is right now there are more slaves globally than in all human history combined, 20 to 60 million, Scribeline. Yes, there are countries in this world that still practice slavery, indentured servitude, and elsewise. The World Cup in Qatar, they don't want to talk about it too much, but how did they prepare for the World Cup and build those stadiums and all that stuff? It was kind of forced labor. I mean, we don't call it slavery outright. We don't want to upset the Qatarians or whatever. But, it was slavery. Yeah, and population growth and everything else. Yeah, slavery has not been eliminated from the world by any means. Right? But to hold people in America accountable today, to somehow say that slavery hasn't been practiced by every culture of every stripe and every color at some point in this world's history, what am I supposed to do with that information? How am I supposed to assess our speakers, given the history of people that looked like them in the past? Or am I supposed to assess them on their own character, on their own merits, regardless of what they look like? Am I supposed to evaluate them on what they have to say, rather than what I see of them? If I were blind, what would I say about this person's character, depending on what they had to say about the world or other people? Anyway. I could go on, but I just be repeating myself more so. And heaven knows we got plenty of time left in the year for that. So everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found something worthwhile out of this. Maybe, kind of, sort of, I hope. Let's check out the GoFundMe real quick for Rosebud. $540. Little dyslexia there for a second. $540 of an $800 goal. Thank you guys so much. Cody Fry, Amy Williams, Michael Roby, who else? And a bunch of anonymous, Courtney Sullivan, Michelle Rath, on and on, bunch of anonymous. You guys, you're amazing. Thank you guys so much for your generosity on that. And if you haven't already, please take a look. Or if you can't donate, I completely understand. Please share it out, put it out on Twitter, on Facebook, and elsewise. Little Rosebud, little puppy hit by a car. fractured hip, needs some veterinary care, and they're more than halfway to the goal. So appreciate your guys' attention to that and spreading it around. Beyond that, everybody, as I said before, the Sunday stream will return again next Sunday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. And then Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, TED Excellence, where I'll once again look at an off-brand TED Talk, or perhaps even a legitimate TED Talk, as I did last week, where we found out about how gaming can be a force for good. Oh boy, did we find out. Who knows what mysteries we will uncover next time. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very, very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself, either to Rosebud, either in the past or elsewise to our GoFundMes for our friends, Shady Grin, Angry Illinoisian, who else am I thinking of? His Kitten, Moonshock. Thank you guys so much for this past year of just so much support for the channel, for me, for everybody in the Lords of the Night family. Thank you so much. And with that, before I run out of my voice here, I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend, whether it ends today or you've got the day off tomorrow. I hope you do. Knock for Micah. And I hope you are all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.